and welcome to the U.S. Soccer Podcast. My name is Meghan Klingenberg.
And I'm Ale Bedoya.
And this is the podcast where every week we bring you in-depth interviews with players, coaches, and experts and take you inside the U.S. men's and women's national teams at every level.
And today, we're focusing on the men's national team. They have two huge games coming up, and we're going to be chatting with commentator, analyst, and former USMNT player Brian Dunseth about that. But before we get into all that, Kling, how was your Labor Day?
Oh, it was good, Ale. I actually flew home to Pittsburgh to surprise my mom for her birthday. And she loves to make a joke that she turns 39 every year. And she's turning 64. Sorry to call you out there, Mom, but she's turning 64. And my brother and I actually planned a surprise 25th anniversary of her 39th birthday that I got to come home and be a part of. So it was a really lovely weekend. How about you?
Yeah, I just relaxed, really. You know, Labor Day weekend was great. We had a big result on Saturday night, so Sunday I used that.
Congrats.
Hey, thank you. To wind down, relax, watch a lot of sports on TV. And on Monday, yesterday, off day, I got to get in some golf. So it was very nice. I'm not very good. I went with one of my teammates, Milan Orlovsky. He's just a scratch golfer. I was out there just looking for my balls, but he's very good. So it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Oh, that sounds fun. I actually genuinely enjoy golfing too, but to me, it's more about like hanging out with my friends, riding the golf cart, and having a beer.
That sounds like a great time as well.
All right, let's check in on the men's national team camp with Brian Dunseth.
All right, welcome everybody. We got Brian Dunseth on the show today, also known as Dunny. It's great to see you, buddy. How was your Labor Day weekend?
Busy. I was out in LAFC calling the Sun Min game, the debut at BMO Stadium. And San Diego, LA rivalry was at full effect. And yeah, as always, a fun weekend with the man that I gently referred to as Tio Max Barrientos. But a fun one nonetheless. A little bit of soccer with my kids. Got to see my youngest play in a final, score a couple goals, score his penalty kick. And yeah, it was a good overall weekend, man. Nice to be back home for a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds great. If you could believe it or not, I was actually kind of rooting for LAFC this weekend in San Diego, just for that supporter shield race.
I wonder why.
Even though, we'll never forget that one a few years ago. But all right, we can move on from that. But a lot of folks obviously were enjoying a nice, relaxing long weekend Labor Day here in Philly. Everybody was down the shore, right? The last weekend down the shore to enjoy the beach. But Coach Pochettino and his squad were assembling in New Jersey to get ready for their upcoming games against Korean Republic on Saturday, September 6th, and Japan on Tuesday, September 9th. Big picture here, Dunny. What does this team need to do in these games?
Well, I think first and foremost, they need to win. But for me, I always look at markers, right? I want to see style and substance. I want to see kind of all the visual cues that we expect the U.S. men's national team at this stage in the evolution with this group. I want to see dominance and possession. I want to see transition moments where they're ruthless and lethal. I want to see a fluidity in the attacking phase of play that's anything from, variation of generating goal scoring opportunities or even variation of service. I'd love to see how quickly the team can start clicking. I love when young guys get opportunities. I love when some of the old dogs get opportunities and who can be one of those guys in a very short amount of time, establish themselves as guys that were either fringe U.S. men's national team players or were really well-established MLS vets that are getting their opportunity. And finally, I want to see a team that is in control defensively, that can figure out a way to keep the game in front of them and feel secure. But again, those are all kind of more the visual markers that I'm hoping for. And with, I think, the understanding that Mauricio Pochettino and his staff are making it very evident and very clear that there's not too many more opportunities to take a look at some of these players that they haven't seen up close and personal. But as I say that, Miggy D'Agostino was at like 6 different MLS stadiums that I was broadcasting in the last 3 weeks. So, there's an idea of a foundation of the player that they think they're getting. And then, as you guys know better than anybody, once you're in camp and you're starting to mix and match and you see those that maybe shrink underneath pressure and those that actually bloom under pressure, a significant opportunity against 2 opponents that I think when you talk about intelligence, you talk about speed of play, you talk about technical ability, And then you just talk about player profile with the athleticism that comes along with South Korea and with Japan. This is going to be a huge, huge test. And very quickly, similar conversation to maybe Switzerland in Nashville. I think we'll get a good understanding in the first 15 minutes of who is capable of playing at the level that we think is going to be worthy of a spot on the roster heading into the World Cup next summer.
You mentioned the limited games and limited training sessions that are left before the World Cup. What do you think the players are prioritizing, and what are the coaches prioritizing? Is it different or is it the same?
Yeah, I would say it's the same. I've been fortunate enough to cover Ale going all the way back to the Bob Bradley years, and the conversations surrounding kind of the culture and the leadership and what it took from a competitive aspect. And it's interesting. All we ever wanted, I think, as fans and media members, was to see that next step, right, of what this looks like, of dominance with the ball, and all these things that we try to verbalize on social media that are the most important things. Being around this group, specific to Mauricio Pochettino being the manager, everybody that I've spoken to in terms of the players, they're kind of going in with wide eyes and open ears, because I think all of these things matter. You've got this coaching staff that is so well established on the domestic front, for what they've done with club football and obviously international competitions within the domestic conversation. But this is also an opportunity for the manager and his coaching staff in this last calendar year to truly understand what it means to only have these guys for a couple of days at a time. And I think there's a weird conversation and even a reference point to maybe what happened with Canada and Jesse Marsh heading into Copa America of having the group together for like 40 some days. That's what we were hoping for in the Gold Cup. And obviously, there's so many different factors and nuanced conversation. But they just don't have the amount of time that I think they're used to having. So when they're coming together, every camp, I'm effectively asking Mauricio, all right, so what did you learn last camp? And how are you trying to implement that into this camp? Because it's an evolution. And I think there's a weird there's a weird relationship between the coaches learning what they're learning in real time and the players understanding what they need to do to earn the trust, the faith, and ultimately, from a competition standpoint, earn their spot on the field. So everybody that I've spoken to in these 5, 6 camps that I've been a part of with Mauricio Pochettino being the manager is understanding the moment that they walk through the door, they've got to make an impression. And whether that's an impression of leadership, whether that's an impression of intensity, whether that's an impression of, oh my God, this kid's even better than I thought it was, or God forbid, he's probably not ready for this level yet. I think everybody's constantly learning of maybe the non negotiables of the moment that they walk through the door, what they're expecting.
Yeah, speaking of nuanced conversations, Dunny, let's get into the nitty gritty here and let's evaluate the squad that Coach Pochettino has selected. One player returning to the team is Christian Pulisic.
Yep.
What are you hoping to see from him?
Oh man, where do you want to start? Listen, I was one of those guys on the backside, and I believe it was the Japan and Saudi Arabia game heading into the 2022 World Cup, where all the visual things that I was looking for in the build up to a World Cup, I don't think any of those things were there. Now, listen, it was in Europe. There was like 4,000 people in the stadium, and it just didn't have the feel of a build up for a World Cup. And I can remember I made a statement, something to the effect of, I was concerned about Christian Pulisic and the leadership aspect of what was going to happen in the World Cup because there was this insane hype and focus around him heading into the World Cup. Ali, I couldn't have been more wrong. I could not have been more wrong. And listen, credit to Greg Berhalter and the way that that system was built, because I think bringing Tim Ream and having Jeddah on the left and then having Weston and Tyler, it just kind of opened up this little pocket on the left-hand side for Christian to really thrive. And every time he stepped on the field, he might be an introverted extrovert, however we want to describe him from a personality standpoint, but the guy's guts when he steps on the field, we want to see a replication of everything that was in Qatar, where he just lays it on he lays it on the line to the point where the collision and the goal and having to go to the hospital and still being in the hotel to celebrate with his teammates once they get back. I get it. I'm tired of all the conversations around, I think there is a reality in which everyone can be right and everyone can be wrong. And within however this looks, the fact that he's back in this group, for me, separates all of the drama that happened in the summer. Now, to be clear, I love listening to Tony Meola and Alexi Lalas and Marcelo Balboa and everybody involved with kind of that 90, 94, 98 group. I love listening to yourself. I love listening to Timmy Howard and Clint Dempsey and Landon. I want to hear what these guys have to say because the nitty gritty of the conversation, you guys have always been there and understood what it takes at that level. On the men's side, on the women's side, with you, Kling, you've seen the most dramatic moments where maybe 5% of that information goes public and the rest of it is kept in house. I didn't like the dirty laundry. It was great for social media. It's great for podcasts. It's great for conversations. Um, but I just want to get past it. And whatever this looks like, the reality is for Mauricio Pochettino, you can't sell players and you can't buy players. Now, this is the group, and you have to figure out ways how to create these organic relationships with these players. And at the same time, the players have to understand, can you guys imagine what it would be like next summer in the United States and putting that crest on and stepping on the field? I mean, I remember being a young kid from Southern California and, you know, opting into, the LA Convention Center in 94 just to be a part of the World Cup atmosphere. I didn't have the money to go to the Rose Bowl to watch the World Cup, but I was at the Rose Bowl. I just wasn't inside. I was in the grass outside in the parking lot, just wanted to be a part of the atmosphere.
I mean,
So,
it felt like that in Canada when we played
yeah,
there in 2015. Uh, it felt like a home tournament for us because people could
yeah,
just hop over the border and come celebrate and cheer us on and be there and watch us go through all of those
yeah,
moments. So I cannot even imagine how much bigger, how much cooler it will be
yeah.
in the USA. Like it's going to be amazing.
It is. And listen, back to Christian. I would have, if you were asking me, and I think I said this before the Turkey game in Connecticut. I never had Christian on the roster for the Gold Cup. The roster for the Gold Cup, the complexity of that conversation changed the moment that the Nations League was invented. And then obviously with Copa America. And I understand the concern because we didn't get the results as a fan base that we all kind of wanted to see. But I mean, some hardcore statistics is Christian played in 101 games for AC Milan in 2 seasons. I mean, I think he was like 142 at Chelsea in the time he was there. He effectively almost matched the same amount of minutes played, and he's a full-time starter. He's playing with all these competitions. So, like Yunus Musa, like Wes McKinney, like Tim Weah, if you want your guys there for the entirety of the camp, I got no problem with it. But I also think that we have to understand that we've got to have players healthy and ready, both physically and psychologically. And if that meant missing the Gold Cup, then so be it, because the strain on these guys right now is incredibly difficult to deal with. But again, the problem is we're talking about our superstar here in the United States. So inevitably, there's going to be links to Cristiano. There's going to be links to Messi. There's going to be links to whoever else we want to, pontificate about. And the expectation as a leader and a captain is that Christian plays every single minute of every single game when there's an opportunity to join the U.S. men's national team.
And that expectation, whether fair or not, is what comes with him playing at such a high level, right? And I get in being the captain and being a leader. I think we want something out of him that maybe he's not, ready to give out. He doesn't have to be the type of leader that a lot of us maybe expect of him. I think, like you mentioned, he leads by example, and that's one thing I'm looking forward to seeing from him with these 2 games here is how he leads by example, and that's performing on the field. And he's got the heart, like you say. He's puts his body on the line, like we saw last World Cup, and he's always willing to step up in big moments and come up with big goals, assists, and that's
Yeah,
what I'm looking forward to see is him coming into camp and doing his thing on the field. And that's at the end of the day, that's what matters the
100%.
most. So
Yeah.
moving on from him, though, over the course of the Gold Cup, obviously he wasn't a part of it, but there was many others that were. We saw some players come in, really make a name for themselves. Guys like Diego Luna really became enamored. The fan base became enamored with him. Who do you think in this camp, out of some of the new guys or current guys, that could come in and make a big impact?
I mean, I think we're all hoping that Diego Luna has. And listen, talking to Diego, he obviously wasn't happy with the performance against Mexico because it was a final, because of the complexity, of his family and everything that goes into the conversations of being a dual national. Obviously, looking for him to have a strong camp. No Kai Danks. I'd love to see as an 18-year-old what he looks like. I'm intrigued by Tristan Blackman and Zawadzki to see how quickly we can, again, have the visual markers of what this looks like. Bigger picture, it's the 9 position, man. A year and a half ago, we thought that Folarin Balogun was going to be the player that was going to be our outright number 9, and we were never going to have questions about that ever again. And then Ricardo Pepi and Josh Sargent have had to try their say. And then with a couple of injuries or maybe lack of form, we're back to that same question. For Matt Freese, is he the established, undisputed number 1 in goal? Because with Matt Turner coming back to the United States, that gives him an opportunity for the minutes and the games and the starts that he hasn't had over the better part of the last 3 years. And the one player, because I got to spend some time with him during the FIFA Club World Cup, Chris Richards. Man, I'm really looking forward to Chris Richards continuing to establish without a shadow of a doubt that he is going to be, as long as he stays healthy and fit, because that's obviously what took him out of the 2022 World Cup at Qatar, that Chris Richards continues to announce himself as a presence in the physical terms, but also from a vocal leadership, non-negotiables, him sitting behind Tyler, those two barking at people in front of them. Yeah, I'm excited to hear and see what that looks like on the field in these next 2 US games.
So, from experience going through a World Cup cycle, the lead up to it, we had the core group of players not selected, but it was kind of known who they were going to be about 9 to 10 months out. And that's where we at right now with the US men's national team going into this World Cup next year. And we're looking at a camp with a lot of uncapped players, with new faces, players who haven't been in a while. When can we expect to see a team that will be ready and cohesive enough to compete in the World Cup? Like, is that something that we should be focusing on now? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this answer because, I was of the belief that coming out of Qatar that we were like this, and then it was just going to be a rocket ship. And then obviously everything that transpired, there was so much information. Even going with Brian McBride and Ernie Stewart leaving the organization and everything that happened, well documented, and was like a footnote to every story that we read for the better part of the next 6 months. But I think it's important to kind of understand that even going back in Trinidad and Tobago and the failure to qualify for the World Cup, U.S. soccer is effectively turned over twice, both completely behind the scenes with leadership, and then even the infrastructure and the creativity of how they were trying to redesign U.S. soccer and separate the men's side from the women's side and really dial in from the development. Think about the incredible amount of money that's been invested to the women's side and now to the men's side as well. Kind of the shared CBA. All of these things have been really important steps. But as we've seen the women's side with Emma really take off and exceed expectations, we
Mhm.
were kind of expecting that. I mean, I was in Kansas City, September, I believe it was 10th of last season. And we're like, okay, announce Poach, announce Poach. Like, this is going to be like Emma, announce Poach. And obviously the results haven't been there. And the disappointment, I think, from all of us was the complexity of a 90-minute game of soccer. You go back to that Panama game in Copa America. If Weston McKennie's header is not judged to be offside, then the game looks completely different. If the referee holds, I can't remember, I think it was Blackman, who absolutely just lays out Matt Turner in goal. Maybe if that's a red card, that game's completely different. If Timmy doesn't raise the chicken wing and VAR is not around, well, maybe the game, that the whole tournament looks really different. So all of a sudden, stratospheric change and pivot again. Um, Nations League. We just basically thought it was going to be the 4th consecutive Nations League title as we were watching this group. Like, how you mean you've already won it 3 consecutive times, and then everything that transpires in the summer. I'll be honest, and I have a list of players that I was surprised that aren't a part of this roster. But then and I'm still. I remember Tony Miola said this to me a couple of weeks ago. There's a point where we almost have to understand that Mauricio Pochettino has an idea, and that idea of players doesn't necessarily align with what we're used to thinking about with the U.S. men's national team. So, in that kind of train of thought, I'm trying to understand that with this group of players, minimum amount of time, no World Cup qualifying, you guys can speak again to that better, the idea of stress and jeopardy and travel. Um, how do you how do you naturally judge what this group of players is capable of doing without the jeopardy of high risk? There's a familiarity with these teams and having the opportunity to play Turkey and play Switzerland and now play Korea Republic and now play Japan that preps you for maybe World Cup tendencies. But at the same time, like if you win 2-1, is that a great win? If you lose 2-1, is that devastation? So these are part of the challenges is to create these moments of accountability of performance that I guess would check the boxes of this coaching staff. But as I say all that, I was expecting more of, and as I look back, maybe the Jamaica home and away game are our two strongest rosters because of the jeopardy. That was before kind of the failure in Nations League and going to a Gold Cup final against Mexico with more of a mixed group of players that we usually kind of expect on a Gold Cup roster.
Yeah,
Well, you talk
because
about the high level of risk. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, Ali, all you.
No, you're talking about the high level of risk. I mean, these two friendlies, I guess, in a typical World Cup cycle. I mean, granted, Pochettino came in the mid-cycle, right? But in a typical one, we'd be qualifying, right? These would be qualifying games, but it's not. So I guess in terms of level of risk, this is another opportunity as he sees it to continue to check up on guys and see how they are, where they stand, have a personal look into them, right? Because obviously club form is a lot different than when you're coming into national team. The international level, I guess the speed of play is a little bit different. Intensity rises. So, I can see why he's still experimenting a little bit. But let's see if this is the last camp he does that, right? Because you still want your core group, your 10 months out. It's getting close. It's ticking right now.
It
Yeah,
is.
and I think it's important to think about also like what is the best mix of like tournament experience and having guys that have played at a really high level in the past who maybe aren't performing right now versus current form when you're thinking about this roster. And I think maybe that's also partially what's going into this decision making right now is looking at these guys and being like, okay, I've seen Reyna play at this level before, and it was at a really high level, and maybe it's not where I need him to be right now, but I've seen what he can do. I know that he can play at this level, which is, tournament worthy.
Yeah.
But we don't know about some of these new guys and these new players and these new faces. And so I think it is a pretty good opportunity to be able to put them against some really quality competition, especially these countries where you typically aren't going to find it like that type of style in the MLS. You don't even necessarily find that type of style in like the European leagues. Like this is a very specific type of style that I didn't ever get to experience unless I was playing at Japan, unless I was playing Korea Republic. So I think it's a really good opportunity to be like, okay, now we've seen these new guys. We see where they're at against like this quality competition that they don't typically play against. How is that going to stack up against these veterans, these not old dogs, as Denny says, but these seasoned players? I like to go with seasoned players. And just kind of see how you can build the team around that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's God, when I was a part of all the national team camps and I was never able to kind of break through, whether it was like Eddie Pope or Alexi Lalas and Marcelo Balboa to Eddie Pope and Carlos Shimosa and Greg Berhalter or Gucci Onyewu and Carlos Bocanegra, when you get into that camp, you realize really quickly what that next jump is. And maybe the example from like the generation of mixed between you and I is like a Kyle Beckerman who was so late to the international scene, but once he got there, you almost you're never going to see him out of the starting 11 because he mixed and matched so well with some of the guys that were already so well established, like Jermaine and Michael Bradley. I'm intrigued. I really am intrigued by this group because I guess in my mindset, coming from a U20 team to a U23 team, you already understood the 4 or 5 or 6 players that were going to make that jump into the full national team on the men's side. And it hasn't really felt like we've seen that happen in the last couple of years. I am of the belief that Ale's group kind of created a glass ceiling that was so good that nobody underneath them could kind of break through. And maybe that was why on the backside of missing out on Russia, that we were kind of giving caps all over the place to try to figure out, well, there's a huge gap of experience here. You've got these 27, 28-year-old guys that had played virtually every minute and started every single game. And you could trust them at the World Cup in South Africa. You could trust them in Mexico City at the altitude. And you weren't really sure what else you were going to get with these other guys. And then with the young kids, failure to qualify for Olympic cycles, then when they do qualify for Olympics, are they still good enough, or do they in their respective European teams or MLS teams kind of butt up against, 19 and 20? You're not going to play in MLS because they're going to buy all of these European players or these South American players. So they kind of stop their development. So we were in kind of this weird phase. Um, the one thing about Mauricio Pochettino and his staff, they come at it with a different lens. However, we want to describe the previous coaches with the experience in Major League Soccer or an understanding of the value between MLS and Liga MX or down in Argentina versus what we're seeing over in Europe. There's so much weird nuance to that conversation. And Ali, you know what it's like. I played in Sweden. Like when you get there, the culture is different, the language different, the expectations are different. So when you go to France, that's different than playing over in Sweden. When you come back to MLS, there's a different standard, and there's different expectations, different non-negotiables. So to kind of mash these all together, I'm proud of Mauricio Pochettino for verbally saying what we've all believed is that MLS is a better league than it gets credit for. And I think that's one of the interesting things now when we look at rosters, we're trying to understand how have they used their whiteboard and used their, predetermined thought process to kind of mix these players and see who fits best. And then ultimately, as you guys know better than anything in these tournaments, strength of character. It's never the best roster. There's always players that are better individually than other players, but it's like, how do you find the right guys that are, I'll use an example, Jordan Henderson-esque, where he's not going to be starting when he's with England, but every day he's going to be driving the product. He's going to be driving the expectations, the values, the non-negotiables. And that's something that, guys have to learn how to do on a semi-frequent basis to where everyone kind of matches that non-negotiable set by the captain and the leadership core.
Check engine, ABS, or maintenance light on? And O'Reilly Auto Parts is right around the corner. O'Reilly Auto Parts can help take the guesswork out of your vehicle's check engine, ABS, or maintenance light with O'Reilly Veriscan, a free service that only takes a couple of minutes to complete. You'll receive a free, easy-to-read report with solutions based on over 650 million vehicle scans that have been verified by ASE-certified master technicians. O'Reilly Veriscan can identify the most likely problem with just one scan. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts can then recommend the parts and tools that you need to do the repair right the first time. And if you're not comfortable doing the repair yourself, they can recommend a local shop for you. Don't ignore check engine, ABS, or maintenance light. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts and ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today, a free service exclusively at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Then you brought up that lost generation. I put quotes in there just from the failures of Olympic qualifying. I think that was talked about after the generation following my age group, if you will. But look, like you said, this team now, this generation is the most talented bunch, right? But like you just mentioned in a way, talent alone doesn't win you games, right? And you have to have guys that show character. I think Pochettino has talked about this in abundance about how, the principles, the non-negotiables, those, things that don't pop up really on the stat sheet, if you will, on the box score, but it's very important. And you talked earlier about guys that you think are going to make an impact. Let's talk about the first timers. Talk about the guys that are the uncapped players in this squad. Who do you see coming into this camp and making a difference?
That's a great question, man. I'm looking at the list right now. That's why I'm going sideways on here. Sebastian Berhalter. I want to continue to see his evolution and a weird byproduct. Thomas Muller signing with Vancouver, I think, is only going to help raise his day-to-day experience. I'm really intrigued by the player profile of Damian Downs now making his move to Southampton, because in that conversation of Josh Sargent, Balogun, how does he, again, with a short sample size, separate himself? And that could be finishing, crossing and finishing drills. That could be all the sharpness stuff. I mean, as you know, Ali, this defender claim that when you get these players that are in such extraordinary runs from their club football, there is a weird thing that changes when they go to the national team. It's not the same players that they're playing with. It's not the same, instinctual movements at times. It takes a minute to kind of understand that. In the midfield, oh, sorry. I really want to see Alex Freeman and Serginho Dest. And I don't know how this looks. I could see a world in which Serginho's on the left-hand side, Freeman's on the right-hand side. But Serginho coming back to the group after being out with the ACL injury, and Freeman continuing to step by step just evolve. I thought he was really strong the other night against Miami in Leagues Cup semifinal. And maybe the oddity, and by the way, I certainly didn't have a Klinsmann and a Berhalter on a roster less than a year out heading into a World Cup. There's a weird inside joke in there somewhere. But Klinsmann
Right?
and Celentano, how they how do they maneuver themselves around Matt Freese, who seemingly is now the undisputed starter based on what we saw in the Gold Cup, and more importantly, who's not on this roster with Zach Steffen and Matt Turner.
We're going to chat more with Dunny, but first, a quick reminder, the U.S. men's national team is bringing the energy to Austin, Texas. On October 10th, the USMNT takes on Ecuador at Q2 Stadium, right in the heart of one of the best soccer states in the country. Join the energy in Austin as the team gears up for the Men's World Cup right here on home soil. Get your tickets today at ussoccer.com/tickets. It's really hard for me to say USMNT. I am so not used to that. I just need to say, I had to practice that on the run up to this. Anyways,
Well, that's funny. That's funny. Dunny, you brought up that there's a joke somewhere in there with the goalkeepers, right? Obviously, the new ones, Klinsmann and well, yeah, you mentioned Berhalter before, but there's the goalkeeper position right now. There's kind of a keeper conundrum there, right? Traditionally, the national team it's been a position of strength, right, for the U.S. The players called in now, though, have 7 caps between them. What kind of impact does that have on the team?
I'm trying to think of it from a center back perspective. The generation that I was in when I was called into national team camps we went from Tony Miola to Casey Keller to Brad Friedel was our goalkeeper at the Olympics in 2000, and then transitioning into Brad Guzan and Tim Howard. There was never a question about who the goalkeeper was, and there was never a concern about who the goalkeeper was. And I mean, you guys know this, playing the ball back to a goalkeeper, some were better with their feet than others. Some were more comfortable. And God forbid if you played it to their bad foot or their off foot and you just took a rollicking from them. That was always a fun moment. But yeah, I don't know. Like I look at the next generation of goalkeeper and they're all kind of bunched in together. You have Matt and you have Zach, who are well-established goalkeepers. But then even Patrick Schulte with Celentano and Freese, they've been the goalkeepers that we were talking. I mean, Schulte starts in the Olympics. Celentano was a play. I mean, and both you got both Ohio goalkeepers, NYCFC goalkeeper, and they're all very similar type of profiles. They're great goalkeepers in Major League Soccer, but we were all kind of waiting to see who established themselves as the clear cut. And again, it seems as if Matt Freese has established himself. And by the way, all these guys are physical units. I mean, they're all like 6'4" to 6'6", and you're like, have you been chiseled out of rock? What the hell is happening over here? So again, I mean, I'm looking at 27 Freeze. I believe Schulte and Celentano are 24 now. Jonathan Klinsmann's 28. The path less traveled, and obviously we all understand the nuance with his dad Jurgen, and going all the way back to the tweet with Landon Donovan, and the World Cup in Brazil, and all of that stuff. That was the biggest surprise to me. But I also understand, having watched Tony Jimenez, the goalkeeper, with Jack Robinson. I don't know if you guys have watched goalkeeper training with this group. My God, the intensity and the look. Tony's got a face when he's smiling and shaking your hand, and then all of a sudden he crosses over the end line and goes into the training field, and he's a psychopath. He's just drilling balls at people and
love this.
screaming at them, and his face and his jaws jutted out. And
Yeah.
I remember I said to DeMarcus and Kyle, when we were down in Austin for the very first, the last training session, match day -1, before the very first game in Austin. Who was it against? Panama? I think it was Panama. And I was pretty sure that Ethan Horvath was never going to play again for the U.S. men's national team because of the training session that I saw. And so, however Tony sees this group and whoever he likes and how he sees, right now, this is who they're going to trust. And there is something, I don't know if gratifying is the right word, but there is something very cool to see about opportunity and which one of these kids can take that opportunity. But Ali, Kling, the moment that you either it's hard to earn trust, it's very easy to lose trust. And I think you'll find that out pretty quickly with whoever's in between the post.
You mentioned chemistry, and as a defender, I always felt like one of my most important relationships in the back line was with my goalkeeper. And it takes a while to build that type of chemistry. Like, you need to be training with them frequently. You need to be talking to them. Like, there were times where I would work with AD French or Alyssa Nair or Bella Bixby, who I've played with national teams and for the Portland Thorns. I'm like, okay, if I take away this angle here, does that help you or hurt you? Should I be taking near post, far post? Like, they're giving me direction about who's on my back shoulder when there's a cross. I feel like this is such an important position to fill. And so we're looking at it and we're like, we just don't know who it's going to be. And obviously there's a lot of new people and faces and additions to this roster that were a bit unexpected. But like, what are we looking for going forward from a goalkeeper? Like, what do they have to do to become the person that is going to be the World Cup starter?
I think all of them have different attributes. I mean, Tim Howard's attributes, while some were similar to Brad Guzan, they were completely different goalkeepers, right? When I think about my generation of Tony Meola and Casey Keller and Brad Friedel, again, three completely different type of goalkeepers. Where I knew if Tony was behind me, I could zip a ball to him, and he's like, traps it with his right, switches his body to a left, hits a 60-yard diagonal. Whereas maybe with Casey, Ollie, you play a ball back to him, that thing's getting launched 85 yards up into the front for maybe a winger to try to run onto. Where Friedel, with his arms and his hands being so long that you felt like he could get to anything. So the attributes, again, what I always wanted, I would tell my goalkeeper, come off the line. If I scream and tell me, I'll body out. If you crunch me, that's fine. Cover in the air, get on my tail if I'm not touch tight. If someone's, passing and moving, communication, feel free to give me a bollocking if you need to. But the one important thing, we got Tim Ream back in camp, obviously. You've got Chris Richards back. You throw Tyler Adams in front of him. Wherever the Serginho Dest conversation comes, all of a sudden, that's a lot of communicators, right? So it almost takes away, if not the most important part of the field, the most isolated important part of the field with a goalkeeper, to maybe settle them down. And then it's about momentum and confidence, and I always felt better if I was playing with a young goalkeeper that could come up with an early save or an early push around the post. And then I just run up to him and like, let's go, give him a little roddy rod, give him a bump, give him a passionate, okay, we're in it. Let's go. Forget about everything else. So I think there's ways to kind of manipulate that. But again, I mean, as you guys know, it's about relationships and it's how long, and maybe that's the part that we're not thinking about is a lot of these guys have, and we probably don't give enough credit to the experience of playing for the Olympic group or the 20s or the 17s or even down to the 15s. Some of these guys have had familiarity for the better part of the last 10 years of their career. So they'll, I hope, instinctually understand their strengths and weaknesses.
And speaking of strengths and weaknesses, let's move forward to the opposition. Let's talk about the opponent. Starting with the Korean Republic. Dunny, what are their strengths, and what would the U.S. team need to look out for?
The strengths are incredibly intelligent. Sorry, I got my handy dandy notes like all ready to go.
I love it. Great. Dive deep.
Theoretically, we're talking about highly intelligent, right? We're talking about the player profile is not overwhelming strength, but strength, speed, athleticism, high level of technical ability. I'm thinking about from a winger standpoint, from defending, thinking about, outside backs connectivity with wingers, thinking about, defensive midfielders communicating who's moving off back shoulders. From the games that I watched, and again, I'm still kind of in the infancy of these next couple days of prepping. You've got John up top. You've got Kenyon Lee, who's his time at PSG. He's got the penalty in that first game at the Rose Bowl against Atletico Madrid, more as an impact sub. Obviously, Sung Hyung Min is going to be the player that is going to be front facing and focused. 100 and I think it's 52 some international appearances.
Needs no
Obviously,
introduction.
yeah, I mean, and by the way, the atmosphere, we did the game in Chicago, South Korean flags everywhere. In Boston, didn't have the Messi Beckham effect, but was pretty damn close. It was like 48,000 people showing up. In Dallas, I know they're having a ton of stadium construction issues, but it was heavily packed. And then there were people outside of BMO Stadium at 10 a.m. waiting to get in. We ran into this fan group, Max and I, and we asked them, um, like, "Oh, yeah, come to the game." They're like, "No, we flew from Korea to come to this game." So Sports Illustrated Stadium, I think is going to be heavily influenced by the flag. And then Bay on that right hand side, coming off the 4-0 win against Kuwait, they got the 2-0 win against Iraq. There are teams that can score goals. They create a lot of chances. I believe they were hovering between 15 and 18 shots on goal in those two matches. So as you kind of dial in, as much as you want to, I think, minimize what they're trying to do and theoretically keep the game in front of them and all the broad strokes that we always talk about, um, how in that conversation for a well-established team that's trying to tighten the screws of everything that they're trying to do right now with regards to the strongest possible group of players they can bring in, can you, I guess, for Mauricio Pochettino, get a group together, guys that are familiar now with what his expectations are, mix and match maybe a couple guys with opportunity. And again, similar to Turkey and the game against Switzerland in particular, understand quickly that the level of the opponent is going to be extremely high from a nerves aspect to a settling in aspect to a competition aspect. How do you come out of that first 15 minutes setting the tone with, again, what U.S. men's national team fans need to see? Because my fear is in this last 12 or so months, without the jeopardy of qualifying for the World Cup, with the drama that's been surrounding the team and everything that's been happening, I would just hate the idea of apathy for this group right now, understanding the World Cup's not too far away.
One of the best things about international football is just having different styles attributed to different countries. And I always loved playing against Japan. I love watching Japan. I just feel like it's so fluid. They're thinking 4 steps ahead of everybody else. Like, honestly, they're one of my favorite teams, men or women, in international football. But tell us a little bit more about them. Tell us who's their key players and what kind of test will that style be and provide for the U.S. team?
Yeah, again, I think it's a team that's incredibly comfortable in possession. The idea is they can go up and over the top and hit the channels because of their athleticism, but at the same time, they're more than comfortable with continuous kind of pocket rotation. Again, I was about 25 minutes into the game against Kuwait that I watched, and I was incredible. I always Y scout every team as often as possible. That was my base for all the FIFA Club World Cup stuff. Um, but the idea was that there was a freedom in the movement. And between Oh and Wong, you kind of sit in the 2-player pockets in front of the back line. It was a hybrid of a 4-2-3-1. However, I know we kind of talk about it's a constant, morphing of positions with and without the ball. But theoretically, in their 10-yard focus, 4-2-3-1, protection of the back line, both outside backs love to get forward. They were underlapping at times. They were overlapping at times. What I saw was the 2 wingers were ideally coming in and rotating dual tens position, which we've seen Mauricio Pochettino do, whether it was Yunus Musa, Tim Weah, Brendan Aronson, Christian Pulisic, Diego Luna. I think it's a modern day kind of continued development of the teeter-totter effect. They were extremely high with their press. They were trying to smother any type of buildup coming out of the back. I'm going to be very, very intrigued to see what the buildup looks like for the U.S. Because they're pretty adamant on goal kick build out. And then ultimately, how do you play through that press? How do you deal with that press? How can you maybe stretch early from a winger perspective, Ollie? I mean, in those types, are you serving the ball in early, 30 yards out? Are you trying to combine? Are you trying to invert and get a left-footed shot? Are you trying to get the end line for cutbacks? All of these different things. The one thing I would really like to see is obviously I said play through the build out. I'd love to see dominance and possession in midfield. One thing I've noticed is Greg Berhalter was working on something near the end of his tenure with the U.S. that I would love to see, and I've seen glimpses of it with Mauricio Pochettino, is being so comfortable in possession and being comfortable with, like, say if the ball's on the right hand side, comfortable in possession with a Serginho Dest overlapping a Tim Weah, comfortable in possession where a Tyler Adams theoretically sits in the pocket that then Chris Richards slides a little bit deeper. So comfortable that they can play through Ream back into pressure, maybe suck in the right hand side of Korea or Japan, and then hit the big switch. So you could do kind of like the Brentford esque conversation. I remember Berhalter was talking about it. It was like switch, set, serve was something they were trying to take from Thomas Frank and Brentford at the time, which was then sucking in a team to one side, really overplaying the simple possession, then to kind of catch the shift happening. And that was just one version of one type of attacking build out that they were looking for in the attacking phase of play. So all of these things are kind of like bullet points that I'm looking for. But it's weird because in the position that I'll be in with Turner, it'll be more of a desk conversation than being on the mic as a co-analyst. Where in game, I'm starting to notice things and try to point things out. So pontificating, those are some of the things that I'm hoping to see. But in the game, it's not until halftime where we're either really excited or we're really frustrated with what that first 45 minutes look like.
Well, maybe we can bring you back on. You can post game, analyze it. But no, that's some great insights there. I think these two teams are quality opponents with a lot of really good players that are playing in top clubs and in the top leagues in the world. So it's going to be very exciting. But thank you for that, Dunny. And before we let you go, let's get a prediction from you. I don't want to ask you about the score. I want to
Okay.
ask you, or you can also give us a score take, but who's going to be the key man for the U.S. men's national team in these upcoming games?
I mean, it's easy for me. It's Christian. I mean, it's got to be Christian. He's 1A in any part of this conversation. Um, I'm really excited to see Zendejas. I was actually surprised that Zendejas was, and again, I don't understand the conversations, relative to Jackson Reagan in the January camp or relative to Tim Weah and Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic being theoretically available for, the Turkey and the Switzerland game, but not being a part of the Gold Cup, right? So none of us always understand what's happening. We think we have a good idea, but unless we hear it from the horse's mouth, we don't have confirmation. Zendejas, I think his run of form for Club America has been phenomenal. I thought against LAFC in that $10 million match before the FIFA Club World Cup, I thought Zendejas was the best player on the field. And I could use a couple different examples, but he's the one guy I would love to see have a cleaner run with the U.S. men's national team because, like Luna, similar type of statures, very dynamic, very clean, can play a bunch of different positions, and I think could be emphatic in moments that could be really, really important. I would love to see, and this is probably more towards Nations League where he had the deflection and the clearance off the line. Josh Sargent just find the back of the net. I think he's such a good player in the domestic conversation that we sometimes forget the amount of injuries he's dealt with for the past 3 seasons. And even the ankle injury heading into Copa America 2 summers ago. Tim Weah, I'm a big fan of Tim. I really am. I think that he's incredibly dynamic in moments, and I'd love to see how do I say this correctly? Because we live in a hot take world. I would love to continue to see those moments where he can take the chance or generate the chance that's put away. Because I think he generates more chances offensively for himself and for others than he gets credit for. Tyler, he's a monster in the middle. I love his mentality. He's so agitating and hated by other opponents. But I call it the Dunsethery, the dark arts, like the pinches and the pulls and the agitation and all that stuff. I just I'm such a fan of the way he plays. Um, Talked about Freeman. I'm just a huge Tim Ream guy. Like at this stage of his career, I mean, you guys know you
So
have to have a lot of
solid.
luck. Well, you
Yeah,
got to have a
so
lot of
solid
luck
too.
with your fitness. You got to, avoiding injuries, but to have a monster mentality at that stage of his career and still being such an important piece to where similar maybe to the conversation, Ali, about your group that, he's created this glass ceiling where there's no other left-footed center back that can take over on that side. And ultimately, like, who's the highlight of this group? I don't think any of us had. I know I did because I see Diego Luna on a very semi-regular basis out here in Salt Lake City, so I've understood what he was capable of. Still, the lunacy of him being left off the Olympic roster, I'll never be able to understand, no matter how many times people try to explain what happened. Um, but who's the next Luna? Who's the next guy that you look at and you say, that's the crest. Like that's it. That's it. Because I think, you guys like myself, as we look back in our careers, there's got to be moments of regret or maybe, man, I wish I would have done that a little bit differently. Or man, if I had that opportunity again, psychologically, I approach it from a completely different angle. Um, these are going to be some of the last chances for these guys. So my advice is take it with both hands and walk away with no regrets, because at the end of the day, there's so many things you can't control. So just control the controllables, which is, preparing yourself for the best possible performance you can.
Dunny, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all of your insight, all of your MNT expertise. It has been a great time talking to you, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sonny.
Ollie, that was so fun. Had a great time talking with you and Dunny about U.S. men's national team. But now I want to ask a little bit about Philadelphia Union and you and your squad. In a few weeks, you're going to play against Nashville in the U.S. Open Cup semifinal. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. And look, I think we've had a great season thus far, competing, staying at the top of the table right now in league play, but also advancing in the Open Cup Open Cup semifinal. I hope that we're going to advance to the Open Cup final. But I think
I love that confidence.
No, Nashville away is always a tough opponent. They've also been having a great season, so credit to them. It's going to be a little bit tough, I think. We travel away the week before we go to Vancouver. So we play them on a Saturday night. We'll be traveling directly from Vancouver to Nashville. But yeah, look, we're excited. We're looking forward to competing. We've had a decent run of form in away games this season. We just had a great away result against Cincinnati in league play. And, the matches we've played with Nashville this season is like we have pretty similar styles of play, right? And we like to get at each other's opponents, play a little bit direct and, get at second ball. So it's always comes down to maybe who brings it, who has the more intensity on the night. And it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle. But I think the group is very excited. We're very motivated. It's one of the trophies on the line for us this year as we compete in, in league play. But, whenever there's a trophy on the line, it's you want to go for it. So I think the guys are excited and confident.
The U.S. Open Cup is such a unique experience, and there's really not another tournament like it in league play in the United States. So I wanted to know, what would it mean for you and the Union to win the Cup?
Yeah, as you mentioned, look, there's a lot of tradition with the Open Cup, right? There's a lot of history there. It's the oldest trophy in our country. And I think it would definitely mean a lot just for the sole purpose of adding a trophy to our cabinet, right? In the Union's short history here within the league, I knew when I came here and signed for them, that was one of the things that I wanted to give back, right? As a club looked to be more ambitious, to start really competing on a regular basis. We've been able to do that in league play over the years, but we want to add more trophies and silverware in the club's cabinet. So I think whenever there's a trophy on the line, Meghan, you know how it is. You compete hard, and that's what you play for. And so the fact that we're here in the semifinal, I was part of a losing effort in the final, in the cup final. to Houston a few years back, and I don't want that feeling here. And we got to this stage now. We've got I think the strongest team we've had in a while in terms of depth as well. So the guys are going to give it their all, and we're excited, and it would mean a lot to be lifting the U.S. Open Cup for sure.
Nice. Good luck. And we will be really excited to see you in that semifinal. We'll be rooting for you. But last thing, we have to go to our segment, Ask the Pros, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts. This is where you can ask a question for me, David, or for Ale, and we'll get back to you and answer it on the show. First question is for you, Ale, and it is from Michael in Dallas. Michael in Dallas wants to know, what's one piece of advice you'd give young players who want to make a meaningful impact both on the field and off?
Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question, but for young players, got a lot of familiarity with young players as the union has done a fantastic job of developing a lot of them, and through the academy and giving them chances in the first team. But a message I give to them on the field, how to make an impact. Look, I think you're coming into maybe a tough environment, or this is your first time in with the first team, and as a young player, I think it's important to try to provide something of value to the team, not just the coaching staff but the players. Come in here, work hard every day, and you don't have to be leaders. I know a lot of guys to speak about bringing leadership qualities to the table, but I think the way you can become a leader and become enamored with the group is showing that whenever that whistle blows between the white lines in training sessions, that you're giving it max effort all the time, you're bringing it, and also being able to do the little things, the intangibles, stuff like helping out with cones, with drills, or being showing up on time, being professional. That's very important. I think when you first come up as a young player, how look to the older guys, see what they're doing, how they go about their days. I think the game has evolved a lot. Taking care of your body is important. Eating the right things, nutrition. Not having to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, maybe playing video games. I mean, all these things are important that go a long way. And then making meaningful impact off the field. I always try to tell young players, what are your hobbies? What are you passionate about? Find something that is of interest to you. I think that goes a long way, in this day of social media. Maybe you might have a bad performance, you get stuck reading stuff, but you don't want to be just solely focused on soccer. I think find things that give you maybe an escape from the game, that can maybe help you bring it back yourself to balance, and look around in the community. As a player, you have the ability to connect with others, be proactive, and take the time to get to know others. Maybe even connecting just with teammates, get to know them more on a deeper personal level, and you'll find that you can build that camaraderie, and that helps build chemistry and get you ingrained with your teammates. And I think that's the recipe for having a successful career.
I love how you mentioned connection. I feel like when young players come in, they get a little bit nervous and they're like a little bit in their shell. I loved when young players asked me questions. And when I was a young player, I loved asking the veterans questions, because it shows that you're interested in the team. It shows that you want to get better, and it shows that you're willing to be humble and put aside your ego to learn from players that have a lot of experience. So I loved that part of your answer, Ale.
Absolutely, couldn't agree.
And here's one for me from David in Chicago. David in Chicago wants to know, since retiring, how have you navigated the transition away from professional soccer, and what new projects or roles are you exploring to stay connected to the sport? Well, David from Chicago, it was quite the transition away. At the beginning, it was really difficult for me. I really struggled in being able to accept that it was my time to move on and to try different things. And at the same time, deep down, I knew that it was the right time. I was just having a really difficult moment letting it go. And once I did accept that and start looking into recovery, looking into like vacations and spending time with my family and what am I going to do next, then I felt like my happiness and my joy and my being content kind of came back. But at first it was a really hard moment. So thank you, David from Chicago, and thank you to Michael in Dallas. We really appreciate you. And if you have a question for Ask the Pros, please, we want to hear from you. Drop a question to our partners, Westwood One, a DM on Instagram at Westwood One Sports. We'll get it and we'll answer it next time. And one more thing, do not miss the U.S. men's national team in action this weekend. Catch the matches live on September 6th and September 9th across TNT, HBO Max, Telemundo, Peacock, Universo, Westwood One, and I might rely on Ale for this one, Fútbol de Primera.
Fútbol de Primera. Yeah,
There
you got
we
it.
go.
Kling. You killed it. You see, that's amazing. What a fantastic show we had tonight. Really enjoyed it. Kling, this was great. Having Brian Dunseth on board and just being able to answer some of these questions as well was a lot of fun. So we'll see you all next week on the U.S. Soccer Podcast. And don't forget, follow us so you never miss an episode.